students. Today we are going to begin our online learning. Say hello, Sebastian. Fun fact about me, all my pets are named after Shakespeare characters. That's true. All right. So today we are going to be learning about the background of Shakespeare. We're going to look into his life a little bit so we can understand the man behind the play. And then we will actually dive into Romeo and Juliet. And before you whine and groan, it's actually a really interesting play. So just give me a chance. It should be kind of fun. Plus it kind of makes fun of like teenage love and stuff. So you guys are like right there. Anyway, oh, and I have this hat because it's the closest thing I could find to something Shakespearean. Plus I have a pen as well. So without further ado, Shakespeare. William Shakespeare.
All right, William Shakespeare. Here we go. There he is, right there, the man, the myth, the legend. Look at that. He's got his dangly earring going on way before you guys did. So he's already been a trendsetter. He was born in Stratford-upon-Avon in England. Stratford was the name of the town. Upon Avon. Avon was actually the river that runs through there. So Stratford-upon-Avon. Stratford's the town upon the river Avon. And he was born April 23rd, 1564. So, a little while ago. He was baptized April 26th, 1564, which is my birthday, April 26th, 1564. So I bet you didn't know that. We speculate Shakespeare's birth date based on his baptismal record. Because during the time period, baptismal records were actually more kept up than birth records because the churches kept track of everybody's baptisms. And typically, babies were baptized 3 days after they were born. So we know for a fact, based on the baptismal records, that he was baptized on April 26th. Therefore, we can make an educated guess that his birth date is April 23rd. Educated guess. Give or take a day or two. We're not really sure, but that's the closest people can get. Okay? Now, education, he did go to King's School in Stratford, but he actually did not go to college. He just started writing, and he got married pretty darn young, and he just kind of skipped the whole college thing. Now, his family life, he got married to Anne Hathaway, not the Anne Hathaway that was in Princess Diaries. That one's different. I don't think they're related. But he married Anne Hathaway in 1582. They had 3 children. They had Susanna, and they had Hamnet and Judith, who were twins. Unfortunately, Hamnet died pretty young. And this was a pretty big deal during the time period as well because, back in the 1600s, the boys were the ones who carried on the father's name and who got the inheritance and got the land and whatever. So it was a pretty big deal. It was pretty devastating for Hamnet to die so young especially. Okay. Now, these are just some of Shakespeare's titles, his plays that he has written. Maybe you recognize a few. Romeo and Juliet we'll do in the next few weeks here. Macbeth, you'll do your sophomore year. Macbeth is my favorite Shakespeare play, with Hamlet coming in a close second. Then you have your history plays like Julius Caesar, Henry VIII, King Lear, all the ones about the kings, and like Antony and Cleopatra. Those are all history plays. And then we have Twelfth Night, A Midsummer Night's Dream. A Midsummer Night's Dream is also tied for second. That's a comedy. But those are just a few of his play titles. Maybe you recognize a few, maybe you don't. He actually had 4 different professions. He was an actor at first, he dabbled there, but then mostly he was a playwright and he was a poet. A lot of people also consider him a businessman because he promoted his own work. He was kind of like his own agent, and he put together an acting troupe, and he commissioned the building of this big theater in London called the Globe, and it's still there. Kind of partially burned down a few times. It's been restored and rebuilt, and you can actually go watch shows there today, so that's pretty cool. It was an open-air amphitheater, which means there was no roof, so there's a couple advantages to that. Like, you didn't have to provide false light during the daytime because you could just use the sunshine. You didn't have to put a bunch of torches on stage until after the sun went down. Downfall, obviously, it kind of rains a lot in London, so I don't know if that was a great choice, but it worked out. It's still there, historical building, etc., etc. There are 4 types of Shakespeare plays. There's history, tragedy, comedy, and tragic comedy. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we start the actual play. Now, the plague did affect Shakespeare's lifetime. awful, horrible. Obviously, it arrived in Europe around the 1300s, which was a couple, 150, 200 years before Shakespeare was born. But it stuck around for a while, and it killed over 20 million people. That's almost 1/3 of the European population. So it was a big deal. And it spreads through the air. So that's why people did not go places. Kind of like, I don't know, it feels like it's what we're happening and doing right now. And Shakespeare did some of his best work during his time of quote unquote quarantine during the plague. So, if you feel like writing a play, maybe it'll stand the test of time and you'll be the next William Shakespeare. That'd be pretty cool. Now, because the theaters were closed, Shakespeare couldn't make money off of his plays because obviously there was nobody buying tickets and things like that because they didn't want to be in close contact because nobody wanted the freaking plague. So instead of writing plays, he switched to poetry for a while and he started writing sonnets. He wrote 154. If you know who Patrick Stewart is, he's the guy who played Professor X. He was in Star Trek a while ago. But during this quarantine period for COVID-19, he has decided that he's going to read one Shakespearean sonnet a day on Facebook or the internet or wherever. So if you're into that kind of thing, you can hear a true Englishman read a Shakespearean sonnet or two. And some of them you might recognize. Sonnet 18 says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate." So they're mostly love poems. And he did that because that's how he made money during the plague. So he sold his poems instead of tickets to his plays during that time period. So he had to adapt, and he still found a way to make a living, even though times were pretty darn tough. He died on his birthday, happy birthday, in 1616. So he was 52 when he died, which, isn't terrible for that time period. He lived a fairly long life. He got a lot done. Plus, he's super famous still today. So whatever he did, he accomplished something. Now, I want to talk about a couple of the reasons that Shakespeare is still so widely known today. One of the reasons is because he is credited with introducing almost 3,000 words into the English language. So he has had a huge influence on the words that we still use. I'm going to give you some examples. You might not believe me, but I swear to God, if you look these up, it's going to tell you exactly the same thing. These are some of the words he's credited with introducing. We have elbow, blanket, swagger, eyeball, assassination. You can go on the internet and you can look at lists of words that Shakespeare is credited with introducing into the English language. Now, some of them he invented himself, like bump, for example. He invented that word. Some of them maybe someone else used, but he is the one who kind of normalized it or enfolded it into the language, and it's still being used today because he put it in his plays and because so many people were exposed to his work. So that's one of the reasons we still read him, is because he has had such a huge impact on our language, on the English language. Now, another reason is because, you can find a lot of allusions. Remember, allusion is Allusion. Allusions to Shakespeare's work. Shakespeare's works and then the Bible. Those are the two most alluded to works of literature in the history of anything, of the whole world. Because Shakespeare was so good at creating characters that people could relate with. I guarantee when I introduce to you the characters of Romeo and Juliet next week, you're going to be able to pick out characters and be like, oh my God, that is that person right there. Like, they are the same person. And so we're really going to focus on characters as we're reading the story, which is why so many of his plays and stories have been rewritten and amped up and modernized. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at some of those modern adaptations. You do have an activity this week, and I'm asking you to go on the internet, look up some stuff, think of the movies you've seen, TV shows, songs you've heard, whatever, that allude to or are based on Shakespeare's works. And I'm going to give you some examples right here, and then I'll talk a little bit more about that. So here are some modern translations or interpretations of Romeo and Juliet. This first one right here, this one came out in 1996, so it's a little bit older. It's not that old. Leonardo DiCaprio is in it, and then Claire Danes is in it as well. I like this one. This is my favorite Romeo and Juliet movie for a couple reasons. First of all, young Leo. That's probably good enough reason. But also because these guys took Romeo and Juliet and they kept the language the same. So the language is still Shakespeare's language. However, the situation is modernized. So they don't live in 1500s Verona, Italy. They're in Florida. Maybe it's California. Oof. I always feel like it's Florida, but then I think it's California. Anyway, they live in a big city, and it's two gangs, and you can see that they all have Glocks and pistols, and that's not how it was in the 1500s, but this company, this interpretation modernized the situation, and it's super interesting, especially when you see the comparison. This is the one that we would watch in class. Okay, so if you're interested, I think I bought it on Amazon. I don't know if it's on anywhere else, but that's my favorite modern version of Romeo and Juliet. Now, this one is a lot more recent. This one came out in 2013. Haley Steinfeld is in it. She was that singer. She was in Pitch Perfect, I don't know, 8, 4, 2, whatever. I don't know, one of them. And this is pretty good. They changed the language so it's a little bit cheesier, but it's very beautiful. It's a beautiful movie. The shots are gorgeous, and it really captures probably the beauty and the romance of the story. And now don't freak out when I say romance, just calm down. And then a lot of you mentioned Romeo and Juliet. That came out in 2011. And this is pretty common too. They'll take Shakespeare's stories and they'll turn them into cartoons for kids. And so if you know Romeo and Juliet, you have a pretty basic idea of what Romeo and Juliet is about already. There are also a lot of allusions. Taylor Swift's love song. Romeo, take me somewhere we can be alone. Talks about Romeo, Juliet, falling in love, blah, blah, blah. What's interesting about Romeo and Juliet allusions is that everyone thinks it's this super romantic story. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not. It's kind of frustrating, and you're going to understand what I mean. But if you think about Romeo, there are tons and tons of songs that reference Romeo and Juliet, especially if they're love songs, because people think that it's this just romantic, gushy story. So you'll find a lot of allusions there as well. Now, sometimes they'll take the story and they'll twist it a little bit, but you can definitely tell that the story is based on one of Shakespeare's plays. So if you've ever seen 10 Things I Hate About You with Heath Ledger and Julia Stiles, they take The Taming of the Shrew, which is about this woman who just can't be tamed. She doesn't want to get married, and she's super independent, and she's loud, and da-da-da-da-da. And they pay this guy to calm her down and rein her in. That's exactly what happens in 10 Things I Hate About You. And you can see those parallels. If you've ever seen Sons of Anarchy, I got through season 4 and then it got real dark, so I couldn't do it anymore. It was good, but that's based off of Macbeth. There's murder. There's plots to overthrow, powerful figures and all that stuff. And then my favorite cartoon movie, my favorite Disney movie, The Lion King, is based off of Hamlet. And if you know both stories, it's very easy to see those parallels. So when you're doing this activity for the week, I want you to think of maybe look up. I know there's a Macbeth movie that just came out. I don't remember who's in it. I haven't seen it yet. But you can think of modern interpretations or reamped versions of the stories, but also think of stuff like this that's just based off of the story. Now, use Google for this. I'm not expecting you to come up with this stuff off the top of your head because it's impossible. I didn't know. I had to look stuff up as well. This is stuff I've learned throughout college and my teaching experience. But use Google and find some of those that are based off of Shakespeare stories or that are a revamping of Shakespeare stories that you would be interested in seeing. Read the storyline, watch some trailers, whatever, but I want you to choose a couple of those, and you can find that assignment in Canvas, and that's one of your activities for this week. If you want to use any of these, sorry, I went back too far. If you want to use any of these that I used, you can use one. If you're like, oh, I love that movie, or oh, I really want to see that movie, you can use one of these, that's fine, but then find a couple more that are different and not on my list, okay? So we're going to go ahead and jump right into the prologue. That's your background for Shakespeare. You can get started on your activities and stay tuned because we're going to go ahead and start the prologue of Romeo and Juliet.
Yo, what up? It's your girl Van Bizzle. Today we're going to learn about meter. We're going to learn about rhythm. We're going to learn about iambic pentameter. Okay, we're throwing it old school. This is what rappers are supposed to look like. We're talking old school Eminem. We're talking Marky Mark, Flava Flav, Snoop Dogg, right? Yeah, the 90s, the early 2000s. Sorry I don't have 18 face tattoos like all your rappers do today, all right? Okay. there was my introduction. This is not me, you guys. I'm not a rapper. I don't, I can spit lyrics, I'll tell you that much. But I'm going to go ahead and go back to just regular old me for this. The reason that we're talking about rapping and rhythm and meter is because Shakespeare was one of the OG guys to really use rhythm in his writing. It's called iambic pentameter. We're going to learn about it through the lens of Act 1 prologue, and you guys are going to practice it, okay? So it's about the beat. It's about the rhythm and the feel of his words, and it's going to be a little bit reminiscent of what it's like to rap. And so you guys are going to get a chance to create your own iambic pentameter raps. You don't actually have to rap. It's up to you. But I'm going to show you how this works, okay? So here we go. We're moving into iambic pentameter. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at iambic pentameter. We're going to take a look at how to mark a line with iambic pentameter. Remember that iambic pentameter is just a pattern of rhythm. It's what writers use when they want to put a little bit more emotion, when they want their writing to have like a beat almost. So it's expressive, and Shakespeare uses it quite a bit. Not all of his stuff is written completely in iambic pentameter, but a lot of it, especially like the soliloquies, when there's one person on stage and they're being very dramatic and emotional, that's when he'll use iambic pentameter. If you watch that extra video, that link I put on in your module in Canvas, it's going to give you a little better idea of what that means. Okay, but it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. So iambic, that's the beat. Okay, that's the unstressed, stressed. But then pentameter, we know that penta means 5, which means that there's 5 feet in each line. Now a foot is 2 syllables. Okay, we know that a syllable is like a part of a word. So when you're doing iambic pentameter, it is not about how many words are in the line. It is only about syllables. That is very, very important. Iambic pentameter, syllables. So for example, if I were wondering how many syllables I have in my last name, I would just clap with the beat of my name. Van der Beek. So I have 3 syllables in my last name. So when we're doing iambic pentameter, you're going to focus on those syllables. And the easiest way to do this is to go ahead and break the line into syllables first. So we have the bird. That's 2 syllables, which means boom, we put a line there. That's 1 foot. Of dawning. Now this is where it gets a little tricky because dawning is 1 word, but it has 2 syllables. So if I want to have 2 syllables here, of dawn, there's my next foot. The bird of dawning singeth all night long. So all I've done here is I've separated this line into 2 syllables per chunk, or 2 syllables per feet. The bird of dawning singeth all night long. Okay, so that's the start of our iambic pentameter. Now the iambic part means that it goes unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, etc., etc. When I say unstressed, stressed, that's how we pronounce, that's how we emphasize each syllable. Okay, so unstressed, or ta, it gets a little U right there for the mark. Dumb gets a slash, and that means stressed. Ta-dumb. So if I'm reading this line, it always goes like this. It goes U slash U slash U slash U slash U slash. That's how every iambic pentameter line should look. The bird of dawning singeth all night long. So those slashes, that means that's a stressed syllable, which means I put a little more oomph into it. That's where my emphasis goes. So if I'm reading this line really clearly using iambic pentameter, it's going to sound like this. The bird of dawning singeth all night long. The next one. The nights are wholesome, then no planets strike. It can be a little tricky with those words that have more than 1 syllable. But if I'm marking it again with my iambic pentameter, the nights are wholesome, then no planets strike. It's the same thing every time, which means that 1 line of iambic pentameter, 1 line of your poem is going to have 10 syllables. 10 syllables exactly.
any more or any less, and it's not iambic pentameter anymore. Okay? So you guys are going to practice this. You're going to write your own poems as one of your assignments for this week. It doesn't have to be very long, but it does have to be in iambic pentameter. So when you're going through each of your lines, you better be able to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, I have 10 syllables. Syllables, not words. 10 syllables in that line. Okay? We'll do these last two, and then hopefully if you have any questions, let me know, but this should give you a little bit of a better idea of what iambic pentameter is. So right here, unto, that's 2 syllables right there. Young ham, let for, upon my life, this spear, it dumb, to us, will speak to him. 1, 2, unto, young ham, let for, upon my life. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This spirit dumb to us will speak to him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's very important to remember that each line is going to have 10 syllables. If you look back up here, ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. Okay, people say that it's like the beating of your heart. Ta-dum, ta-dum, ta-dum. That's why Shakespeare uses it when he gets emotional, because it's your heartbeat. It's a rhythm. When you get into that rhythm, it really emphasizes that part of the play or that speech or whatever it is, okay? It's a rhythm. All right, that's iambic pentameter. I'm going to demonstrate for you using the Act 1 prologue. If you have any questions, let me know. Now, when he does the prologue, this is the prologue. This is Act 1 prologue of Romeo and Juliet. Now, the prologue serves to let us know what's going to happen in the play. And some people are like, why the heck would you give spoilers? Why would you say what happens at the end at the very beginning of the play? Here's why. He wanted to keep his audience interested, so he gives them a huge detail. He's like, here's how this is going to end. The fun part is seeing how it all unfolds, because Shakespeare plays are incredibly complicated in terms of like plot. There are plot twists. It's not hard to understand. There's just so much that goes on, and it's so dramatic, and there's so much happening. So that was the fun part for the audience, is seeing how all of this unfolded. So that's why he said, here's what's going to happen. You better stick around to see how we get there. Okay? So we're going to do a couple of things with this prologue. We're going to look at the meaning, and we're going to look at the iambic pentameter. Let's start with the meaning, just so that you have an idea of what it's saying before we get into the rhythm. Okay? So our first line says, 2 households both alike in dignity. Now, if we were in class, what I would have you guys do is write the translation beside the line. So if you would like to translate this as we go, it will give you a clearer understanding of what this prologue is saying. You can just listen to, that's fine. But if I were you, what I would have to do is write it down as I go. The first line, 2 households both alike in dignity. So we know that we have 2 households. We have 2 different families that are similar in status. Okay, in this case, they're a little bit higher status, right? So we have 2 households, 2 families that are very similar in social status. The second line says, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. He's giving the audience the setting of the play. So it takes place in a town called Verona, which is in Italy. Now, something interesting about Shakespeare, just a side note, is that he rarely put his plays in England, because a lot of times he would be commenting or making fun of stuff that was happening in England, but he didn't want to get in trouble for treason. Okay, that was just a side note. But the second line, it takes place in Verona, Italy. The third line says, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny. So ancient grudge. We have this old grudge, or this old family feud that's gone back so far that nobody really remembers why it started. It's kind of like a Hatfield and McCoy's. By the way, Hatfield and McCoy's is based off of, or loosely based off of, Romeo and Juliet. Okay? Breaks to new mutiny. So we still have new fighting going on. Mutiny is going against something, right? If there's a mutiny for a ship captain, all of the crew members are like, you're out of here, we're done with listening to you. And Romeo and Juliet fit into that kind of description of mutiny, but we're going to get there in a second, okay? Your fourth line says, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. So what is this feud like? It's very bloody. People have died. A lot of people have died. And more people are going to die. And then the next one, from forth the fatal loins of these two foes. Loins is like, birth, right? So we have offspring coming from both families. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Right there. That's the ending of the play. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. We know from the very beginning that Romeo and Juliet are going to take their own lives. All right? It tells you right there in the prologue. I'm going to combine the next two lines. Whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife. So we know that the deaths of Romeo and Juliet is going to bury their parents' strife. It's going to end the feud. The next part, the fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end not could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. So it essentially just rewords everything, right? The passage of their death-marked love, the continuance of their parents' rage, they're still angry, which but their children's end not could remove. So the children dying, the Romeo and Juliet dying, is the only thing that could have stopped this feud, is what that line is saying, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. So right there, the prologue is saying the play is about 2 hours long. And then the last two lines, the which if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. If you sit around, if you stick around and you listen, you're going to figure out what happened. Okay, we're going to kind of put all the pieces together for you. So that's the meaning of the prologue for Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet.
I'm going to do a little iambic pentameter demonstration for you, rap style. So this is just to get you to understand that it's very rhythmic. Iambic pentameter is all about the rhythm, it's all about the beat. Okay, so this is the Act 1 prologue. You ready for this? Yep. Yeah. Romeo and Juliet. Yeah. Here we go. Two households both alike in dignity. In fair Verona where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny. Where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Whose misadventured piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end not could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. The which if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss our toil shall strive to mend. Word. Okay. And that's it. And so when you're thinking about iambic pentameter, really think about it's about the rhythm. When you're writing your own iambic pentameter poems, you got to remember the beat. Ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. It's your heartbeat. All right? Okay.